chair for today, Thomas Bouchez, European leader for M&A and organizational transformation in Mercer. Thomas has over 15 years of experience, has worked on over 200 deals, and has led project and teams for up to 300 consultants on a single project. We're very happy to welcome him back from last year. I believe, Thomas, you can hear me correctly, and I'm glad that you're here. If we have any technical issues, we may have to bring you back on stage, but it looks like I see you clearly now. I sent you the other link, so if necessary, you can enter that way. But Thomas will be moderating today and co-presenting the first session. So over to you, Thomas. Welcome and welcome back.
Thank you, Robert, and sorry for disappearing for a second. Someone seems to be using my link, which kick me out every time someone is using that. So yeah, thanks everybody for being here today, despite the coronavirus, the shutdown, the US election, the dog that is running after the postman, some people delivering packages, and all these kind of fun things that are happening these days. As Robert mentioned, let's try to make it as interactive as possible. So please do use the technology that is available to ask questions and make it interactive with the speakers. So let's get started with the first presentation on HR and people success factors and opportunities in carve-outs and divestiture. And let me just introduce Robin first. So Robin is the former global HR M&A leader for ABB, and now the head of benefits. And we will co-host this first presentation. Robin is as an HR leader, experienced in all aspects of global benefits and HR M&A, and also experience in driving global strategic HR programs on compensation, benefits, HR system, and a variety of other areas. So, Robin, I let the floor to you and to get started.
Thank you, Thomas, very much, and thank you for allowing me to be here. Kaya, can we go to the next slide, please? So what I'm going to share with you all this morning is my experiences within ABB in the past large acquisitions and, large divestitures that had carve-out components. There are 3 large deals that I have been a part of in these recent transactions that range from including 1,000 people in 40 countries to over 38,000 people in approximately 60 or 70 countries. So they're all large, complicated, and when you add the additional complexity of a carve-out component, I think you'll find this is very interesting. I have anonymized the information that I'll be sharing with you just to protect privacy of the deals themselves, but they're actual situations and actual learnings. So I look forward to sharing with you, and I think we have a question we want to ask for the next slide. Correct, Thomas?
Yeah, that's right. So we have a Menti poll.
Can't hear you, Thomas. Thank you.
Can you hear me?
Now we can.
Okay. So we have a Menti poll. You probably have used this kind of platform before. We just don't want to do it interactively. So the way you can use that is you just need to either open a different tab on your Google Chrome or your Internet Explorer, and then type menti.com and use the code that you're seeing on the screen. You can also do that on your laptop, or your other laptop, or your tab, or your tablet, or your phone, if you prefer to use a different device. And the first question we would like to ask you is, what challenges do you face during divestiture due diligence regarding employee matters? So let's do a first test on this first Menti, and we're going to have 3 other polls during the session. Mm-hmm. So Kaya, if you want to switch screen. So again, you just need to go to menti.com and then enter the code, which you see again on the screen here, which is 725527 And if you have any question, you can use the chat as well. Very good. We're getting the first responses. Robin, I hand it up.
Okay, this is great. This is very helpful. We have slides that you'll have copies of, so I don't really want to focus on every element of the slides. You can refer to them later. I'd rather focus on things that are of more interest to you. And I see retention is a clear number one for the challenge. Transparency, benefits and rewards, data availability, engagement, access to information, severances, hard, soft data. Okay. Thomas, maybe we should keep this open just 30 seconds more, and then I think we're seeing a pattern.
I think it's not moving so much, so I think.
Okay, so we can move ahead. Okay, great. Can we go back to the slides now, please? The topics that I'm going to present will be in stages of the phases of carve-out and divestiture. So this first topic is all around due diligence and deal negotiation, the HR employee matters factors, between the kickoff of the deal itself till deal sign. So I'll stay focused on that for this first session, and then we'll come back to some other topics in the later sessions. I see that the number one focus that was brought was around the talent area, and I think honestly that is in terms of what a buyer will be looking for. A buyer is, of course, interested in the hard facts, cost, number of employees, et cetera, but the real value of the deal when you look at your human capital, of course, is the talent. And what we have experienced is that it is important to paint an accurate, positive picture of the talent that will be part of the deal as it is to deliver the hard factors. The data, the statistics, et cetera, don't really tell the true story. So it's very important when you're having a deal that a divestiture, whether or not it's a carve out, to be certain that you're able to articulate what it is that the talent brings to the table, highlight the experience of the management team that will be part of the deal, what the people skills are, what our own organization does to develop people so that a buyer is sure that the talent that they're acquiring as part of the deal is really a key part of the value. And I think, as several of you mentioned, one of the keys in this time period is how do you focus on retention. So again, during this particular phase, often some key talent is aware of the actual deal and could even be part of the negotiation. And what we have found effective is that if we limit the number of people that are part of the divesting organization, but for those that need to be involved, I think it's very critical that there is a retention strategy that you have ready and in place before you even open the data room. People's natural reactions, of course, is to be concerned about their future. Money is always important. You can work out a retention structure for those people, but what's also important, if those people can be part of the deal itself, that will help them feel sure that they have part of the future with a potential buyer. And if you are an acquirer in one of these deals, that's equally important for you to understand is how critical it is that when you are talking to key talent and assessing key talent during the acquisition process, that you make sure that it's not just money, that there's a future that's attractive, that is available to people. So I think it's very important to have transparency with the people who are part of this. It's important to talk about the cultural differences, even during this stage. How different are the cultures? What is the attraction of the new organization for the management team that's going to be part of the deal? I think to back up a step, that really highlights the criticality of the core team expertise. Candidly, in the past, sometimes in the organization that I'm a part of now, and even previous organizations, sometimes divestitures aren't given the same level of strategic focus as you would if you were acquiring. But it is important that your core team on a divestiture has the same kind of experience that you would put on an acquisition, because you're communicating with acquirers. You have to have the expertise to know how to sell, if you will, your organization to an acquirer, and importantly, know how to address the topics and hand in hand with any acquirer. It really becomes a joint discussion and a joint effort. So that core team expertise from your HR employee matters and your business is very important to be part of the due diligence. It's also important to discuss and be fully aware of a buyer needs, particularly when there is a carve out. We've found that buyers may have a very low experience in what that means when they are acquiring an organization that will operate either fully or partially standalone. So it's important to understand not just what the buyer expects, but even to help describe what those needs might be during, just like any other type of due diligence and deal pre-signing planning. It's important to plan how that carve out will come to be. What would be the steps to separate an organization that's integrated with your own organization, and then how to prepare for handover to an acquirer. And that's really needs to be part of the planning, even at this early stage. And again, as I mentioned, that often is even stepping into and working with the buyer to help have a strategy for what can work best in this particular circumstance. I mentioned briefly the separation planning. When you have the fully integrated operational organization, there has to be a strategy in place, or at least a high-level timeline, or you won't be able to know what time you need from signing to close. And you want to set expectations. You want to have a plan in place before you actually sign the deal. And then usually there's a subsequent announcement immediately after deal signed. So you have to have the strategy in place for how you're going to communicate to your existing employees, how the buyer is going to communicate, how you're going to work with collective groups, if there is a communication need with a collective bargaining group, how you're going to work with customers to be ready to communicate that this will be a smooth transition and a handover, and then how you're going to work with the other stakeholders. So there's a great deal of separation planning that has to occur in parallel during due diligence and deal negotiation. And then importantly, but not specifically listed here in the separation planning, is to begin to be aware of how standalone can an organization be in the time frame that you anticipate between deal sign and deal close, to see if you're going to have a transition services agreement, if the buyer needs a transition services agreement, or if they are able to separate, and whether or not you want to have those particular elements as part of your SPA. One last point on talent before we move off of this topic is that it is also important in your SPA, and I think probably most of you know this as professionals, but it's, I think, worth repeating, is be careful that your SPA protects the employees that will be acquired under part of the deal. it is best for the seller and the buyer if the talent is retained. And part of that isn't just the specific retention strategy for key employees, but what you need to make sure that all employees feel comfortable that they will be protected in the deal. And I think, again, most of you are probably quite familiar that what is typical is that you would have some sort of a comparability clause, at least for the first 12 months after deal close, so that you can ensure that folks don't get concerned about their future and know that at least for in the intermediate term after an acquisition, that their compensation package in totality will not be reduced, or that if they are separated, that they would be protected and not that they need to begin to start looking for other employment. So that's another area to address retention and be able to communicate that as soon as the deal is announced. So I'll move away from this topic. We do have breakouts. I'm available also to deep dive with anybody who would like to talk about this as well. I love to share information, so I'm happy to talk. If we could maybe move to the next polling question, Kaya, that would be good to get information on what folks would like to hear next.
So again, go back to the menti.com, and then if you can enter the code that you're going to see on the screen, which is 106236 and 8. And maybe just to add on what Robin was saying, actually, at the same time we were helping ABB on one of the divestiture, I was working on a global divestiture for a pharma group at the same time. And exactly what was done during due diligence and written in the SPA drove a lot of work during signing and closing. Just to give you an example, usually you have terms and conditions that are being, agreed between the buyer and the seller. And we have 30 pages documents in each of the country. And, this is great for consultants, obviously, but this created a lot of unnecessary work, which, in a lot of cases you want to avoid, and it's a bit of a lose-lose situation. So you want to, there's mechanism, and we can talk on offline around that, but there's mechanism on way to simplify as well the work between signing and closing. But let's go back to the question. So if you can answer the question, what are the typical issues that in implementing the separation after signing in your experience?
Motivation, TSA. Responsibilities, culture, transition and retention, change, unforeseen elements, tension, culture, what changes and what doesn't. That's important.
I see it's not moving anymore.
I think we're good, yeah.
Okay, if you want to switch back to the presentation.
Thanks very much, Kaya. So I'll talk about the separation activity as a first step, and then the day one as a second step. The examples that I'm referring to all had a carve out, so there was the need to separate a fully integrated organization and have that organization be able to run standalone. So what is important in this phase, and we use terminology day zero, meaning the day that the organization is pulled away from the parent organization and begins to operate separately, but is still owned by the selling organization. What we have seen consistently that it is absolutely critical to have visible executive level sponsorship. Typically in activities like this, a great number of people are involved, particularly in a fully integrated organization that's being carved out. There are a lot of operational folks who still have a business as usual day-to-day job and will naturally struggle with priorities. And it's very helpful and a key to success to have that executive sponsorship particularly on a large deal, to emphasize that it is priority number one. Also equally important and frankly a big lesson learned to me is how critical project governance is. In that I incorporate planning, adjusting your plans, replanning, adjusting your plans. You have to have a very clear and as detailed as possible way to get from where you are to where you want to go. And breaking the projects into phases for us has always worked very well, because there is always going to be some adjustment in the project plan and timeline. And if you can focus on, you and the team can focus on the phase that you're in at the moment, it helps give short-term achievable goals. We have used on these types of deals a sort of a two-in-a-box approach, if you will. The meaning of that is that not just the selling organization, but the group of individuals who are running the business being acquired collaborate on how best to go about the separation. That they will be running the organization to some extent in the short future, so it's important to have them part of building the organization. Also, usually in our situation, there are always some antitrust concerns. So at this point, there really can't be much three in the box. There can't be much collaboration with the acquiring organization on details of the separation or details of operation due to antitrust issues. So at this point, after deal sign, but before day one, we've treated the divesting organization as the representative and proxy of the acquiring organization. Having clear roles and responsibilities, it's very critical that everyone knows what their roles and responsibilities are. I would not remotely attempt to skip on resources. Most organizations are not staffed enough with their business as usual organization to manage a project like this without external resources. As Thomas mentioned, that Mercer was a key part of our HR project on many of these deals that I'm referring to. And it's may seem sometimes like an investment that is an additional cost, but it is a very, very small investment to make for the success of the deal. So I would not hesitate to bring in your experts as early as possible and make them a full part of the project. We also focused immediately and early on the collective consultations. Every organization has a way that they work with their collective bodies, but you can't wait until you get close to close to pass the hurdles with the collective bodies. Usually you can be more successful if the collective bodies are aware and feel comfortable with what's happening, then try to address these closer to day one. So we do this early and often. Another critical element is the standalone organization, and for this directly ties to the TSA question that was brought up. So that standalone organization, again, in our cases, has always been part of a fully integrated operation, has to be able to run as a separate company. That's not what they have done in the past. So you need a focus on organizational design, on talent identification, who can run the new organization. Will you replicate the current processes and infrastructure of your parent organization? Or is this the opportunity for a new way of operating, or even a new employee value proposition? That usually involves a bit of time, but it can be a good opportunity during a time of change. And again, you can see how important the collaboration, the two in the box, how are you sure that the business stays focused on delivering business results during this period of time? Is up until, from signing till day zero, we typically have the parent organization as the leading heavy lifting. We are the sender. So we do the heavy lifting on this part of the project, so that the divesting organization can focus on continuing their business as usual. They can focus on delivering the results that they still need to continue to deliver, while becoming educated and part of the buildup of how they will operate their new organization. Also important, all during this time frame, is the communications and change management. That goes across not just the employee matters, but it goes across all the functions, all the business. I mean, the common element in all the communications and change managements are people. And there are people who are customers, there are people who are investors, there are people who are board of directors and executive committee. You have people who are part of the organizations. You have people whose job is changing. And each one of these people do need to know as much as you can share. And we would advise that you share as much as possible about what will change and what will not change. And if you do not have the answer yet, then you do not have the answer. Let people know when you will be able to share that. It's better to be transparent, but don't overpromise or overcommit or state things that are not correct. It is the natural that people are uncomfortable during times of change, but they're also very fearful for their positions, for their livelihoods, and actually what gives them energy and joy. They want to make sure that that's still what they will have in their new organization. Don't overlook the fact that the divesting organization, also the parent organization, the employees who are part of the parent will remain with the parent, also are undergoing change. This is a sense of loss for them. They've worked with colleagues and they see that a group of people is being divested. They have emotions and feelings, and they also have questions as well. So this is a constant, very, very honestly, needs to be a constant and well planned out way of working. There are some collaborations you do need to make with the acquiring organization to be sure that you're delivering consistent communications, and that's typically not an antitrust problem to have those types of discussions, because you want to send the same messages from both parties during this particular period of time. Part of the preparation for the standalone organization, to touch on the TSA, is how prepared can the standalone organization be to provide their services without continued support from the parent organization. You actually should be able, should have planned that to some extent during the due diligence and deal negotiation process, where you have some idea of how independent that organization is able to be in the planned timeline. You'll always undergo surprises at this period of time. You'll think that you can often move faster than you can. And it becomes important during this period of time to identify, even pre-day zero, where will the divesting organization still need support. We you can put a TSA inside the SPA, the language of the TSA inside the SPA, or I think a better practice is to have a separate TSA document and make reference to it perhaps in the SPA, but let that TSA document be a separate item, because you don't particularly know what items will be included in it until you go through the separation process. You really are not going to be in a stage to know what TSA services may still be necessary. Of course, I think we all know that using a TSA is not ideal, but it is very common and very necessary, at least for a period of time. If you identify that you're going to have a TSA, also identify how that TSA can be exited. So if we can go to the next slide, please, Kaya. As I mentioned, I'm talking about this in two stages. Now I'll refer to the stage once the organization being carved out is operating on a standalone basis, at least to the extent possible. How do you prepare for day one? Because up until this point, the business may be operating as a separate organization, but it's still legally part of your parent organization, and there's still leadership and oversight and a bit of still handovers that are occurring during that period of time. You will have discovered during the day zero preparation areas where the organization is not fully ready for standalone. But it is very important, as much as possible, to do a leadership responsibility handover. Let the new organization operate the way that they need to operate, again, within the overall legal compliance and governance you need to have as a parent organization. But this is the opportunity for an organization to test the organizational design and talent that have been put into place while they're still under the ownership of the parent, so the parent can step in if need be. So that's sometimes difficult, but that leadership responsibility handover is very important to success. It's also very important to success to really push for that operational standalone. Everything looks easy when it's on a piece of paper. It all looks very doable. Then when you start doing things like selling things on your own, doing your own payroll, doing your own things that perhaps your parent company did for you previously, you encounter different kinds of unexpected opportunities. And that's a chance, again, if there were any defects or failures or any adjustments that need to be made, that you could make that during this time period. I will tell you, we have consistently always had an adjustment to something in the model once the operational standalone period occurred, because there was some element that simply there couldn't have been predicted or didn't work the way that we thought it would. And so there was an opportunity to make some adjustment, however minor, to ensure that the organization can be successful when they really are standalone or somewhat standalone under the new organization that owns them. The change management communications need to continue. They get now even heavier, but they change focus. Now the focus should become more about excitement for the future, for the organization being divested. They need to begin to be able to build up the excitement about the change that is coming. That's part of the retention and the motivation for folks, is to be excited about the future. There can be, at this period of time, it becomes even more important for a three-in-a-box coordination, at least on the change management and communications. Preparing for day one, how will announcements be made? How quickly can new leadership of the new parent organization step in, be on site? We would always recommend that day one, in the major sites, that if possible, if COVID permits, that you have the executive leadership from the new parent organization physically present, or at least the delegate physically present. If that's not possible, that you would pipe in webinars such as this, welcome people, have people become part of, excited about the new organization that they're part of. all through the period of time, even day 0 readiness to day 1 readiness, the management who is going to be the leadership of the local leadership of the carved out organization, it's very critical for them to be visible during this period, be available to answer questions, be accustomed to repeating things often, frequently, the messages over and over and over and over again. We have had very good retention success on all of our divestitures, but I think the key really is that people don't, who they work for is just as important for them as the company that they work for. So by making sure that their local leadership and even their more visible senior leadership stays connected with them, it's been the key to the leadership, plus the excitement about being part of a new organization. And it's worked very, very well. I would say don't wait to address the employee labor laws. Be sure that you bring up that early, that you know what the nuances are of the labor laws, depending on the type of deal that you have, which in a global organization may be different, country by country or even entity by entity. And that's what we have experienced, is sometimes things are equity deals, sometimes they are asset deals, sometimes they are carve-outs, sometimes they're demergers, sometimes they are reverse carve-outs. Each one of those has a different implication of employee labor laws, and you have to be prepared with a great deal of very specific subject matter expertise and ready with how you're going to address every possible thing that can come up. So this is very, in a global organization, there is no global labor law. There is no global way to handle this. It has to be handled locally, but it is important to understand and have a position on how you're going to address any challenges that employees might have to the transaction itself. Be ready to have a position and stick by your position. Don't make individual exceptions to what your strategy will be, because there's always going to be individuals who will try to negotiate something different. That's just the nature of humans. But have a strategy and stick to it. But don't be surprised, and don't wait to the last minute for this. Again, at this point, another element that has to be ready by day 1 is a TSA, because at this point you would have been working on your TSA itself. You should have exited any ISA, and that's our acronym for an internal service agreement, meaning that the parent's still supporting the standalone organization. If that ISA cannot be exited at least 2 months before day 1, I don't think it's safe to say you're going to be able to exit, and it needs to be added to your TSA list. Again, that needs to be monitored and managed, again, in a large, complex, global situation. Depending on how your organization operates, that can be a very its own work stream, its own global work stream to manage this on a global basis. The pricing is very important. It needs to be as precise as possible so that you're not losing money by offering a TSA. And you need to have discussed amongst the divesting organization and the parent organization, how is it those TSAs will be exited? You can't put a TSA in if there's no way to exit them. There has to be an exit strategy. So all those elements have been consistent that I've shared with you on day 0 and day 1, consistent, necessary key success factors. So thanks for letting me share this. I don't know, Thomas, if you have any points you'd like to add under the day 1 readiness.
No, I suppose we can move, just looking at the time, and then just to make sure that we have a bit of time at the end for questions. Thanks, Robin. I just wanted to take a bit of a step back from the actual M&A work, because we're going to spend a lot of time on the 2 days on the actual M&A work, and just wanted to bring a different perspective and spend a bit of time to discuss how organizations can use transformative changes that are either chosen, like M&A, or driven externally, like the way we're seeing with the current crisis, and really discuss how they use these changes to become more agile and resilient, which is a big topic nowadays. And before I ask you a view on this and share some practical examples, I just wanted to reflect on a piece of research from our Marsh colleagues. The risk consulting team there monitors the performance of organizations under threat and evaluates the characteristics of these organizations to define why some thrive, why others only survive. And the chart you can see on the screen normalizes the organization's performance over a period of 250 trading days after an event that is threatening the business. And this event can be related to any threat, right? It doesn't have to be, COVID, for example. It could be natural disaster. It can be product recalls. It can be corruption, all of which require some kind of urgent responses. And the thrivers, which is the blue line that you can see on top of the screen, of the graph, are those that are showing effective resilience, experiencing minimal loss of performance and even continuing to grow by up to 5% over the period. While on the other side, the survivor, which is the line at the bottom, shrink on average by 12% over the same timeline. So I won't go into the whole details of the research because it's quite heavy, and I'm happy to share the paper to whoever is interested in these findings. But there are also other studies that distinguishes adaptive responses from resilient organization, with example like sharing information more extensively, doing collaborative problem solving. And that differentiate that from the more dysfunctional responses, like micromanagement, limited information sharing, or increased power struggles, the way you probably have seen in certain organizations in these days. So if we move to next slide, and before going into the next Menti poll, it's not surprising that resilience is a hot topic in the current climate, right? But the direction that organizations are taking to reinvent themselves can be quite different. So I'll be interested in hearing your view on how your organization is thinking about reinventing. So again, if you go back to your to Menti and use the code 63, 20, 27, and 8. So Kaya, if you want to switch screen. So 63, 20, 27, and 8. And you see the code again on the new screen. So you see the code again on the top here, 63, 20, 27, and 8. So the question again is how your organization is thinking about reinventing in the current climate. Okay, I can see investment, which is good. That's a good sign. Collaboration is one of the topics that came out very strongly as well on a survey that I did recently on restructuring, and there was a question around reinventing, and I actually have the result here. Collaboration came up that 87% of the respondents actually responded that there was an increase in phases on collaboration and digital collaboration. Culture obviously is a big topic. Remote working and the flexibility to work was also one of the top actually responses from the survey. Accelerate. I was reading actually a paper this morning saying how the percentage of a very high percentage of organizations are actually accelerated their whole digital transformation and also all the transformation they were ongoing. Diversity and inclusion, and the whole topic of reinventing in a more sustainable way. is also on top of the agenda of many organizations. Agile. Okay, very good. I can see that a lot of these topics are definitely in line with some of the surveys that we did recently. So let's go back to the presentation, if you don't mind. So reflecting back on the research and also on the poll that we just did and the research on thrivers and survivors, I'd like to look now at 3 topics through practical examples. First, a PMI project I'm going to present in a second on culture transformation. Second, a demerger project that I'm currently leading, which we use employee research enabled by technology in order to redesign the employee experience and value proposition. And then third, a discussion on how organizations are shifting from jobs to skill in order to build agility and resilience, which is a big topic nowadays. So on this example, I'm currently helping the integration of a large carve-out acquired by a multinational with complementary products, services, and geographical footprint. And we all know how important the topic of culture is to ensure that the strategy is effectively implemented by driving the right behaviors within the firm. But what does it mean in the context of a highly volatile world, and where some of today's assumptions may change in 2 to 3 years time, and even before in the case of a COVID context, right, as you've been experiencing. I mean, this is why really we insisted in this project that the project wasn't a culture integration project. What we wanted to achieve through this way is to move away from the heavy current state analysis, with differences and similarities, and to really focus on the 2-year strategy for this deal and for the business. And this meant first to identify the critical few behaviors that needs to be shown in order to drive the intended results over the period. And then when we found these critical few behaviors, we connected them to our 10 dimensions of culture that we see on the right. And to really identify specific actions that will drive these behaviors. So to give you a practical example that came out of this is the need to promote collaboration in order to enable synergies like cross-selling, but also to better empower talents, right? There actually currently a lot of discussion with the leadership around how to make the combined organization more agile in a current volatile world, and how this impacts the requirements from leadership. For example, on how decisions are being taken and how, risk aversion may drive behaviors away from, a more participative and decentralized leadership styles that is usually required for a more agile organization. So in a transformation initiative like this one, the way feedback is actually collected and decisions are being taken is also an important message that you're giving to your organization and to your employees. In the restructuring survey that I was mentioning earlier, we saw that about 2/3 of respondents also highlighted the emphasis on the degree of individual autonomy, and we'll now see another example of how to include the voice of your stakeholders and employees in order to make the right design decision and enable a more tailored employee experience. So let's move to next slide. Great. So I'm currently working on a major demerger and transformation project where this is clear that, there's a clear need to reinvent each organization resulting from the demerger, but also reflecting that they all go in separate direction. And as part of this transformation, we have been asked to redesign the reward programs of each organization in order to realign employee behaviors to the new business strategy and desired cultures in this case, right? This is also an opportunity to review the perceived return on investment of these programs. As you probably know, compensation and benefits costs are a large cost of a lot of companies nowadays. So the client wanted to make sure that the financial investment that was behind these programs was aligned with how employees value these investments. So so key aspects of the projects were really to hear the voice of all critical groups and critical group of stakeholders to design this new strategy and reward strategy. And for that, we conducted various employee research and preference analysis, which is now made easier thanks to technology. I mean, we can do digital focus group over with over 500 participants, and then we link that to personas. I mean, I guess you're familiar with personas, which is coming from design thinking kind of methodology. But the idea is just to create different kind of groups of cluster different the employees into different groups in order to understand how people looked at different things at different period of their life, and then we connected that to the employee value proposition. But let me give you a practical example from another project, because this one is still ongoing, and you know, we're still working on the outcome of the exercise. But there's another practical example from a different project, which is for a UK business of a multinational, where basically they decided to rethink the value proposition for the over 50s. Primarily with the goal of offering something that was more in line with their preferences. So that was really done with a positive intent, right? It wasn't, the idea was really to understand that all the workers bring stability and want to stay mentally agile and may want different things from their career that they used to, right? So as a result of a series of design workshop and employee listening activities, a new value proposition is being trialed at the moment, whereby employees are being ring-fenced in a separate part of the organization called the subco, where they stay as employees with the same level of security, but they have first an expected number of hours based on the average that they're willing to commit, with an option to flex up and down. They can implement income from they can supplement income from a pension drawdown, so they can control their income level. They can be seconded back into the parent company through a series of gig-like appointments. So they have variety and choice in the project that they're doing. Their work may also include mentoring and community projects, so they have the opportunity to give back. And then the careers is still managed with by an independent talent manager who advise them on career moves, and so they have the opportunity to progress. So really, this is another example of how organization can be redesigned to become more agile, and we're using a more employee-centered approach. But this also highlights an important trend that we'll review in the next slide, which is the importance to value skills rather than job in an agile organization. So let's move to next slide. And I'll try to speed up a little bit just to make sure that we have a bit of time for the question. So basically, what this I'm going to skip through this slide, but very quickly, because you know, the idea behind this slide is more of a provocation a little bit to us, right? As M&A professional. There has been a traditional model before, when you're doing transformation, of firing group X in order to hire group Y in order to execute your transformation. But you know how this is difficult, slow, and quite expensive. And I'm sure you've experienced some of that in your M&A work. And potentially more agile approach is to know the skills that you need for your business, have a clear understanding of the skills you currently have, and then build pathways so that people can develop their capabilities and pivot as the organization needs them to. Another thing to consider is that skills are getting quite, they're getting obsolete faster, right? I remember LinkedIn did for example, a study in 2018 showing that the skills requirement was changing every 18 months. And this approach, right, of looking at skills is also better for employees, as it provides them with longevity in their career and is far more appealing to them. So, you know, the idea is to shift from we're seeing a shift in the importance of discrete jobs and hierarchy, which is the more traditional model, to a greater focus on skills, whereby you define employees and their contribution to an organization according to their skills and capability, as opposed to their previous experience and their job title. So let me stop this. Stop here, and I just like to conclude this presentation with a bit of a provocative question for us as an M&A professional. When is it better to invest in growing skills and competencies organically rather than buying them through M&A? On this, thanks for listening, and let me open the floor to question to Robin and myself. So you can ask question. You can either raise your hand or ask question on the chat.
Or you can click on the question tab as well and type the question there on the right side of your screen on the dashboard.
Robert, I see someone raise a hand, but I'm not sure that was now.
Yeah, that was earlier, I think, because right now no one is raising their hand. If anyone has a clarification or a comment, anything, someone is raising their hand. It is Teresa McClintock bringing on stage. You're live, Teresa.
Thanks very much. And I'm sorry, I started typing and I realized I have too many questions. So maybe if I could just have a couple of minutes here instead. It's a question for Robin. When you're divesting, does the seller always try to ensure that talent is retained?
That has been the experience. I mean, that of course is not always the reason for acquiring an organization, but it has been the experience we've had in the past few years, is that specifically because what I'm referring to are the ones where a carve out and standalone to some extent was going to exist. So there was always the need to have someone to operate that company. So yeah.
Because it's just, I'm thinking of course, as a buyer, you want to ensure that you do get the talent, but I'm wondering if it's the fine balance between the agreement of being able to deliver a business that is fully functional and then also not wanting to maybe let go of the very best people, but I don't know, moving them around within your organization when you're talking about carve-outs is something that we've experienced, and it's very hard as a buyer to do anything about that, really.
Put that in the SPA about what the rule is about who comes with the carve-out.
Okay, good. And maybe just on that, so when you've got a standalone and a carve-out situation, is it entirely possible for a seller to honor that? And I'm thinking in particular when you talk about functional roles, because often there's some that are delivered from a central location. And what do you then do when you have a carve-out situation in some country? We've got a situation in South Africa where we're taking 60 employees, but we're not getting any of the functional headcount. So there's discussions now about whether that actually is a setup that can stand alone, because we don't have those parts of the business coming across in the deal.
And I think as a buyer, you can take several approaches. As one is that you can look for synergies that way, where you utilize your own existing resources, or you could take argument with the seller that is not standalone, or you could even potentially look at third-party resources to support until you can integrate more in the future. And typically, what you're describing really can't be offered under a TSA if it's true HR support, but it is available externally as well. Again, but and I'm happy to talk about specific things, offline if you would like to, but those are the approaches you could take as a buyer.
Yeah. So what I'm hearing is that it comes down to the discussion between seller and buyer and how you address those situations. And okay, good. And the other question is, what is the TSA agreement from a seller point of view? Is that a good deal, or is it a lot of extra work, or How does that work from a seller point of
There
view?
would always be extra work for a seller because the seller would be operating as essentially a third-party provider for a divested organization. So it's always extra work, and it can involve the retention of employees internally that perhaps you would not otherwise need to retain. So typically the TSAs I've seen make sure that the seller is able to cover all their costs, but by protecting the buyer by not allowing any undue profit. So that's why what we have not done often is put the TSA in the SBA, because it's a negotiation of a completely separate contract.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you for that. I'll lower my hand again.
Thank you.
Thank you, Teresa. I think we're getting to the end of the time. Conrad, if you don't mind, I skip your question just to make sure that we are on time. We have a 5-minute break now. So if we can go back, when would be a good time, Robert? At 10 to 50?
Yeah, that would be perfect. 10 to 11, 10:50, we will reconvene with Andre's session. So we see everyone back in a few moments. Thank you again.
Good.
Thank you. Let's all share our appreciation with some emoticons. Thumbs up, applause. There you go. Excellent. Excellent. So see you all in a few minutes.
Thank you.
Thank you again.